Welcome to the Ken McElroy channel. I'm your host, Danielle, here with Ken.
Hey.
So
good to be here. Happy Monday.
I was telling them how you're going to be speaking in Miami this weekend at George Gammon's event for Rebel Capitalists.
I know. I haven't done a live event for a while, with COVID and all that. And,
yeah. Well, you did. Yeah, Tony Robbins was all virtual.
Yeah. I mean, even Tony Robbins that was wild. It was cool doing that event. But it's fun. It's interesting. If you guys don't, know who George Gammon is, go check him out. He's got a lot of people talking about Bitcoin and crypto, but I'm really excited. He's got two economists. One's going to be talking about why there's going to be inflation, and the other's going to be talking about why there's deflation.
Really interesting.
Yeah. So which is kind of the topic, not a lot of people talking about deflation. But I think most people think that it's going to be inflationary. But I'm very excited. And these are not fly-by-the-night guys.
Yeah.
George has quite a lineup. So.
Well, maybe we'll talk about what you learned,
100%.
next week.
Yeah,
try to fill you guys in.
I think that, you'll be there. You'll be sitting there listening, too. I think it's going to be fascinating when you get, really, really smart people with opposing points of view.
Yeah, totally. And then after that, we go to Belize, where you're going to be speaking with the real estate guys over there.
Yes, I'm excited about that. And, Belize is a blast. And that's also sold out. By the way, both of these things are sold out, which is kind of cool. And as you guys know, live events are not easy to sell out. And I think that people just are excited to kind of go do something again live.
Yeah, totally. And, AH says people don't understand what stagflation really is. And that's probably true. So we'll touch on all that maybe next week or in the next couple of weeks. We'll definitely hit all that.
That's a really good point, though.
Yeah.
I mean, I lived through it in the 70s, when there were long lines at the gas station.
Yeah.
And so, I'd love to go into that after we get back. I'm not a huge expert on that issue, but I read just like all you guys, and so it's gonna be
the
nice.
People we're listening to will be so.
Yeah.
And Elena wants to know when you're gonna have a live event in Virginia.
Well, I'd love to. Now that the country's starting to open back up, it's gonna be exciting.
Exactly. So today, let's jump in. We're talking about the middle class and how they're basically getting crushed right now financially, and why that is, and what they can do. So
yeah, it's really frustrating to watch, I think. We're starting to see they're projecting $5 gas. I don't know, I'm not an oil and gas person.
Well, I heard $7 in California.
Yeah. So those are real dollars. If people want to go on vacation, and things are going up, that's for sure. Food's up. There's I'm doing a video today actually, and it's interesting. I think what happens sometimes is when people talk about inflation or deflation. There's a great book that I just finished called The Price of Tomorrow. Mm-hmm. It's got a black cover, white letters. And basically it says there's a lot of things that are deflationary. Like, like this. This is deflationary, this cell phone. A computer, like here, that's deflationary. When you buy it, it goes down. Cars largely are deflationary.
Right.
But then there's a lot of things that are inflationary.
Yeah. And Adam on YouTube, he's saying the middle class doesn't want to work, and that's why they're getting crushed. But I'm going to have to, disagree, because we pulled up some stats, and, 78% of full-time workers live paycheck to paycheck right now. And, the rents versus the income are higher than they've ever been. And basically our wages aren't really keeping up with the inflation that's happening.
He does have a point, though. He must own a business. It's frustrating. When the government threw money at people, by the way, they needed it when they said go home and, your businesses are closed. But essentially, I'm trying to remember, I think they were making around $20 an hour. So essentially, with the stay-at-home money.
Yeah, I think it was about that.
So think about that. That means if I'm, I'm not paying my leasing agents $20 an hour.
Right.
and some of my entry level maintenance guys. And so, and I doubt that you're paying people that are cleaning up restaurants and things like that. So what it did is it created resistance, and so there's a lot of people that how can you blame them?
I don't blame them. I mean, if somebody was going to pay me more to not work, I mean, I don't know. I probably still would, but I just think a lot of people that are tight on money and
so this is exactly if you really like what's happened is this has been going on in the welfare system for a long time. And so, the welfare system, there's a lot of really good things around it, but there's a lot of really bad things around it. So, and so sometimes when you give people money for maybe having lots of kids, it's an incentive for them to stay home and not, be into the workforce. And so all this really did was kind of expose that on a bigger level. So it is hard.
Yeah. There's definitely different thoughts on how to do things and everything else. I know that Andrew Yang in New York City right now is proposing UBI, like a universal basic income, and that kind of goes against that. So basically, everybody gets money even if they work or don't work or whatever. So there's no disincentive to work. It's just another thought on that. But
well, the real one of the things is, as you pointed out, 60% of Americans don't have $500 in their savings account.
Right. That's the other.
So so they're when they got money for I mean even like these kids that are in college. I can't remember the exact number, but some of my kids' friends were getting $2,000-$3,000.
Yeah.
And that's a significant amount of money for
anybody,
for
really,
anybody.
most people.
Yeah. And so, so they're sitting there, they're used to kind of being paycheck to paycheck. And why would you leave and go work somewhere for $20 an hour? So this is why I think that, things are going to get more expensive. This is why I kind of err toward the inflation side, because in order for me to compete, it's already happening. Mm-hmm. You're having to pay people to show up for interviews.
Yeah. You're having to pay them much more than you normally would.
Well, just pay to show up.
Yeah.
Right. And then, of course.
On your lower level jobs. Yeah.
Yeah. But still, I mean, come on, like just for an interview.
Right.
And then you have to pay them obviously well above what they would get if they were staying at home.
Yeah, but it's not, wages really haven't kept up though. So I don't know, how good or bad that actually is, because right now it's 78% of full-time workers live paycheck to paycheck. 60% of Americans don't have $500 in savings. Most people have over $5,000 just on a credit card, let alone student loans and other big things. And probably the worst thing, and the thing we want to address today, is 25% of those people have no money saved for retirement or invested.
Well, there's one other thing, and I think it's important to note. This generation has not really experienced inflation.
Right.
So, if you just go back 10 years, yes, we've had, the dollar's kind of been all over the map, right? So, and I don't want to pound on the dollar on this particular episode, but just go take a look at how the dollar's devalued over the last 10 or 15 years. All you got to do is Google that, and you can see the purchasing power of the dollar's gone down. That is a form of inflation, technically, if your dollar buys less. But the other piece is, to your point on the wages, let's say inflation really has been 2, but I think that there's all kinds of things that you guys should go look at. You should go look at shadowstats.com, and they have a whole different spin on what inflation is. There's another one called the Chatwood Index. That's another one you should go look at. And so basically, this company, they go and they take a look at 500 different things, and they measure them. Because the inflation statistics, or the CPI that you're getting from the government, is whatever their basket of goods is. So there are other people out there measuring these things. And so some people would say that it's significantly more than 2%. But right now, as you know, it's been reported at 2. And most recently, I think in April, it was 4.2. So if we are going into a high inflation period, then I guarantee you that's when you're going to start to see the people whose wages aren't keeping up.
Yeah.
Because before they were just kind of treading water.
Yeah.
You know, so let's say you get
that's the middle class generally.
100%. You get a 3% increase somewhere, and inflation's at 2. The reported inflation's at 2. And so, you know, so things were just kind of, you know, again, treading water. We could be heading into a period of time where the inflation is significantly higher, you know, if the last few months are any indicator of the future, and all the money that's being poured into the economy now, you know, we don't know.
Yeah, and Minotauro says savers are losers. And, you know, Robert Kiyosaki's been saying that for a long time. And the reason is because of this inflation. You know, if you're just putting money in your bank account and getting that piddly interest they're paying now in a bank account, you're just not keeping up with inflation.
Yeah, and I think Robert says that, you know, it's kind of the famous thing that Robert always likes to say. He's not saying as the individual you're a loser. What he's saying is your money is losing value compared to the rising prices in the economy, and therefore if you're holding on to it in a form of savings, it's buying less for you later. That's what he's saying.
And AH kind of said that. He said him and his wife have done the right thing and saved a bunch of cash and have zero debt. And he's like, we've become the losers, and everyone with debt will become the biggest winners.
Right. So
good debt, but yes.
Yeah. So what I like to say, I mean, if you look at a balance sheet or a financial statement, you know, typically cash is considered an asset. I mean, by all accounting principles, cash is considered an asset, and debt is considered a liability. And if you don't know how that works, I suggest you go buy the cash flow game. It's a great game. I taught my kids how to play this game, and they understand that. My son came to me the other day. It was probably 6 months ago, but he's like, hey, we just covered like these basic accounting terms. I was the only one in the class that understood them, and that's from playing the game as a kid. So anyway, so cash is considered an asset. Debt is considered a liability. I actually think that's reversed now.
Yeah.
So and because debt, here's why. Fixed rate debt, which means that you can hedge it at, I think you got a loan at 2.8, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we'll just talk about Daniil's loan. Daniil got a loan for 2.8. It's going to be 2.8 in 10 years.
Right.
Okay, so it's 2.8.
And my payment will still be $500 in 10 years.
Is that what it is?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so her payment's $500. For the next 10 years, every single month, her payment's $500. It's fixed. She knows. So what are all the other things that can go up? Her payment's not going to go up. Her debt is fixed. What could go up would be rent.
Yeah.
Utilities could go up too.
Mm-hmm.
You could have things
HOA.
All those kinds of things can go up too on the expense side. But rent could also go up. But the debt is fixed. The reason why that's important is because that money that you borrowed, it's someone else's.
Right.
Period. It's not yours. You got it from a bank, and that bank got it from someone else. So and so the point is if you fix that rate at 2.8, and inflation we already know was at 4.2, you're beating inflation, and that's the point. Your debt is cheaper than inflation.
Yeah, and we do want to talk about, so, you know, the average household in America, we looked up the stats, and it was around $60,000 a year. Of course, that's going to vary if you live in New York City or Mississippi, but just upon an average of $60,000 a year. So after tax, that's about $47,000. So we were looking kind of at those numbers and looking at the average car payment and mortgage or rent payment, and that is eating up over half your income in just rent and car payments before you get to anything else.
Yeah, and so what's interesting is you guys need to take a look at, you know, car payments. When I first started buying a car, and I'm older than probably most of you, the maximum loan we could have was 5 years. It was 4 and 5 years. Then, 60 months.
Mm-hmm.
Then the next thing that happened was 72 months. Then the next thing that happened was 84 months. Now think about why. Everybody is always trying to solve to that monthly payment.
Yeah.
And so the car prices have gone up, But to compensate for that, all they've done is kick the loan down the road another year, now another 2 years. So 60 months has gone to 72 months, which has gone to 84 months.
And a lot of people even lease and don't even ever
Yeah.
own the car. So it's not
Right.
even like it's ever going to get paid off.
Right. So that's how car manufacturers and dealers have kept that payment. It's all about payment. And the same thing is this is what I think is going to be the big disruptor in end of 2021 and 2022 for homes. Is Janet Yellen, who's the Fed, who used to be the Fed chair, has already said we need to increase interest rates. She came out and said that last week.
Yeah, she did.
She came out and said that last week. So what does that mean? That means car payments go up. That means home mortgage payments go up. That means potentially credit card prices go up. So if they're tied to those rates, if they're not tied to those rates, of course, they don't go up. But essentially, when they're talking about raising rates, they're talking about slowing down the economy. That's what that really means.
Yeah.
And that means that car purchasing will go down. That means that home purchasing will go down. That means that commercial real estate sales will go down. So all of those things, that's how one of the many tools the Fed uses.
So Jessica says that her and her husband both have full-time and part-time jobs. They drive used cars, they budget, they do all that, and they still feel like they're falling behind. So Jessica, just so you know, we're going to give you a few strategies here shortly to help. The problem is you don't own anything that moves with inflation because you're always going to be catching up.
And thank you for being so transparent and truthful, because I think that a lot of people maybe aren't aware of that, and or they're just not acknowledging it, or they're embarrassed.
Yeah, and we've all been there. I've been there.
This is a great question.
Yeah, I think we've all really, and a lot of people are commenting, that they're there, they've been there, and Jessica, we've all been there. I've been there. I'm sure you've been there. Yeah. Yeah. So I do want to touch on, the saying is the poor are getting poorer and the rich are getting richer. And so that's kind of the saying. But the middle class really are falling behind, and kind of there is more of a divide. So why don't you explain why the rich are getting richer? Because it's not because their businesses are making so much more money and all. I mean, some people, but for the most part, has nothing to do with how their business is doing. So why are the rich are getting richer during all of this?
Well, I think that there's probably a lot of reasons. No disrespect to the poor and the middle class, but I think a lot of times the middle class turns their money over to a wealth advisor or a financial planner, like my brother, who literally worked his butt off his whole life, and so did his wife. And this is my own family. And they don't really look at their quarterly statements. They don't really know what they're invested in. It's all done through. And by the way, I'm sure the guy's reputable.
Yeah.
I met him once, and but they're making fees off of their assets, and it's being invested the way that they want to invest. And the point is that when we had the COVID hit, I asked my brother, how are you doing? He's like, I don't know. And literally, I don't know. And I'm like, what do you mean you don't know? And so I think what happens is a lot of times that people take a very passive. It blows my mind that people work their butts off their whole life and turn their money over to somebody and don't really know how it's invested or where it's invested.
Or have control of the investment.
Of course not. They don't. Yeah. I mean, it's super complicated. I have money with a wealth manager, and it's not a ton of money, but it's like, I don't know, if maybe $300,000 or $400,000 sitting in this account. And the wealth manager would call me once a year. Let's have an appointment. I still have never met with him, like this 4 or 5 years, in a row or something. And so finally I call him up and I'm like, I want you to sell everything and move it all into silver. And they're like, what? You know what I mean? And so I'm directing where I want my money. you know, and so I'm calling the wealth manager and telling them what I want.
Right.
Otherwise, they call you and tell you what they want or what they recommend. And generally, that to me is one of the biggest differences between people who are rich and who are middle class or poor, is they don't understand.
They choose to not. They choose to trust somebody that.
Yeah, and I do trust. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I listen, but I'm studying. Just like you guys, you know, what kind of the flash in the pan right now is crypto, you know, and so everybody jumps on, but they don't know why, and then they defend it, you know, like why does Bitcoin go up and down? Nobody can answer that. So same thing with a stock, right? Well, there are things that you can control and things that you cannot control, and I think that a lot of times these wealth management people, these wealth planners, they have very, very, very good intentions on estate planning and all those kinds of things. But the truth is, they're buying products for you. They're using your money and buying products from someone else. And there's incentives there. So,
well, you know, I used to work at a bank like, I don't know, 10 years ago. And our financial advisor, Gary, I remember him. And one day I was chatting with him and I said, how do you know like which products to put people in? And he literally said to me, well, I get a bigger commission on certain ones than others.
Yeah.
That was his. And that's a financial advisor that people would trusted and would talk to and everything else.
Guys, like if you're that naive to know that people don't do things for money, then you're naive.
Yeah.
Like, you know, it's just the way it is. You know, realtors, you know, like when I sell a property, I like to compensate the realtor for finding me deals and for selling me deals more than market.
Right.
Because I want the attention.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's just the way it works. I'm sorry
well,
to
it's
say.
like if a realtor's showing you a $300,000 condo or a $500,000 house, they're not going to say, you know, I think you'd be a better fit in this condo, because they want the commission. It's always going to be the most expensive thing. When you go to a restaurant and you ask, what glass of wine do you like the best? They always pick one of the higher priced wines, because it increases their gratuity.
Same thing with the food. Like, what should I order? Well, it seems to always be the most expensive steak. Why? Because they get a commission or, you know, a tip based on that. So that is just the way the world works. And you can get upset at it. You can be, you know, have anxiety over it. But just understand it. It's not a big deal. And if you know what they're making, and you also know what they're charging, there are different kinds of products that are front loaded. There are different types of products that have no commissions. But guys, let me tell you something. That world, that money that you're turning over to people that are selling insurance and selling stocks and selling financial planning, it's a very lucrative world. And if you just don't understand it, then that's on you.
Yeah. And so now the question is, you know, for those watching that are in the middle class or even the lower class, what do you need to do to get ahead? So really, if you think of it this way, if you even just owned a property, like if you were just able to save up a down payment for a property, that would put you in the game.
So here's what I tell people. You know, one of the reasons why I love the book Tax-Free Wealth with Tom Wheelwright is, and if you haven't read that book, you should read that book. The tax is and will be your number one expense in your life, period. It just will be. You pay sales tax, you pay property tax, you pay income tax, you pay all these taxes. Just look. I mean, just you automatically know that 30 to 40%, depending on your tax bracket, of your income goes to tax. So if you know that, why wouldn't you invest in things that legally can mitigate that tax? Like, you know that 30 to 40% of your income every year is going to go to tax. And in some cases, significantly more. There are athletes, very high-profile athletes, that move to different states because of this. You know, there's, you know, states have different kinds of tax, and so this is a thing, guys. That's what the rich do. The rich, you know, make money, and they're trying to figure out how to keep the most money that they can. This is why people are pouring out of California right now.
Yeah,
that's one reason.
It is
many.
It is one. reason. And then Nun says you didn't answer her question on owning just one property and how that gets you in the game. So can you explain if they could just save a down payment? Because, we have to be a practical example. Like, say they're just paycheck to paycheck like Jessica, and what does she do? And I think the answer is to save up a down payment for one property.
You don't even need to save. So here's the truth. What was her name again?
Jessica.
I apologize for my ADD. Not skipping over that one. Here's the way I started, and here's the way everyone starts. First of all, everyone starts. I went to my class reunion, and I was looking at everybody in the room, and at 18 years old, you all have the exact same opportunity. Period. You do. So now some have come from higher income backgrounds, et cetera, et cetera. I certainly didn't. But what I started was very basic. At the time, my monthly expenses were somewhere between $2,000 and $3,000 a month at the time. This is going way back. So my goal was, how do I create enough passive income to cover that, so that I didn't have to have a salary? And so for me, that was about 10 rental properties. Now, so when you went out and bought your first rental, you used your own money. But now I don't use my own money. And there's these guys, these flippers in the market, they're not using their own money, guys. I don't know, hopefully you understand that. This is, hopefully that's not like an aha moment. But these people that are buying 100, 200 homes a month, they are using other people's money to do it. They're not using their money. Now, are they making a lot of money? Of course. On the flip, they make money. They have splits with their investors and all those kinds of things. OPM, or other people's money, is the key to investing. You can, of course, spend a long time saving for a down payment.
But there are ways to help save money faster. So I did want to touch on those for some people, because you can use other people's money, and that's what you do. And, that's really good. But then there's other people that I think that they just want to get in the game. And they, like for me, like I saved my own down payment on my own place, when I was probably around 30.
Yeah, there's a zillion ways. So if you have a retirement account, you can move it to a self-directed IRA, as an example. So if it's sitting there in a 401k, let's say, you can move it to what's called a self-directed IRA. And just go online and look. There's a zillion of these companies popped up. And they're like a bank. They cannot give you financial advice. But basically what it means is that you moved your retirement savings into your own account, which you can control. Then the next thing is you can invest it. Now, there's, I think it's called self-dealing, so you can't actually use the money, to buy yourself a home, or let's say your parents or your brothers or sisters or friends, or but you can invest it and you can rent it, and I've done this a fair amount. So there are ways to save money yourself, of course. There are ways to borrow from friends and family or other people. There are ways to do it through retirement. The key is to understand all the ways.
Yeah, and Michael brought up something that we were going to mention. He said you can house hack a duplex and, and then rent the other. Obviously, live in one side, rent the other. You can also house hack just about anything. I mean, Jessica, you could buy, if you can save up the down payment, you can buy a house, put somebody else even in another room or something of the house, and they pay you rent. And we've even had people that have written into us that have done that with an apartment to kind of get ahead and save some money. So, if their apartment was $1,500 a month and they could move somebody in a room for $1,000 a month, they're then, taking that $1,000 and saving for that down payment. So that is something, you just got to get creative. One of my girlfriends, her husband rents out their car on the weekends. They're not using it through Turo. They make a bunch of money that way. I mean, you really, with all the apps out there now, there are ways that you can get creative about making some money and saving some money.
Yeah, it's a really, really good point there. And Jessica, I just want to point out that this is an education issue. So it's a really, really good question, and it's okay, and it's a great question. And I think it's probably very helpful to a lot of people that are listening or will listen.
Yeah.
The point is, there are so many things for you to make money, and the one that comes to mind, I've told the story before, but there was a $290,000 dollar piece of land on a main road not too far from me, and it had a billboard sitting in the middle of it. And So I wanted the billboard. I wanted the income from the billboard. So now I had the money, so I bought the land. I put an easement around it, and during that time, the billboard, the land price went up to about 320. So now it's not a lot, but it's more than I paid. And ironically, I paid somewhere around 20 grand for the easement. So now I relisted the land, and we'll sell it for basically about 320. So what I've done is I've bought the land, taken the billboard, and now I've got $3,000 to $4,000 a month of income coming in on that billboard on each side, because each side generates about $1,500 to $2,000 per month, depending on who's on it. Again, that's through a management agreement through a different company, and I'll be in that property for zero. That's seeing something that no one else has seen, and that's from being in the game, understanding it. You can do that with condos. You can do that with houses. The house hacking is a great idea. There's a bunch of ways to do this, and it doesn't always start with I need to save before I can look.
Yeah, and I also don't need to get a second job. Minotoro said, I'm thinking about buying an RV and renting it. So that's just another thing. I mean, there's so many things that you can do to passively make just some additional money.
Yep.
And then other things, if you're in the middle class and you're really trying to save money, there are just practical things that you can do to try to save money to kind of get to that down payment and get in the game. And one of those things is you can drive a used car. You can buy there's some really good used cars online for like under $10,000. There's things like that you can do that are practical. You don't want to try to be keeping up with the Joneses while you're trying to build your wealth on the back end.
Right. I mean, I think hopefully you guys know this, but even Warren Buffett talks about, he drives a used car. And I think that, might surprise you guys. I had 7 cars. I only bought one that was new.
Yep.
Right. All the rest of them, I bought, with, some miles on them. And, and the last 2 cars I bought, I saved $100,000 per car on buying it not new. I just bought one 2 weeks ago, and I saved $100,000 from what the 2021 models are, and so now that's a higher price car, of course, but the point is there are lots of which I can afford new cars, of course. Even I am always super conscious around all of that.
Yeah. And Anna says on YouTube, she wants to know if she's the only person who thinks that she's missed the train for being an investor like Ken.
No. Gosh, no.
Yeah.
No. That train will always keep going. Trust me. I'm just on it for a short time myself. The guys I studied when I first got into the business, that's what I thought too. In fact, confidence or the courage to do it myself. I was in the property management world for a long, long time, in my early and late 20s and all the way into my 30s, and I didn't actually start buying, into my 30s. And even then, they were, I started with a 2-bedroom, 2-bath myself. So it's just now 20 years later, everybody listens like, oh, I want, what Ken's done. Well, I can tell you, I got the shit kicked out of me a lot over that period of time, and I made some bad deals. I made some very good deals, and I learned a lot. And so now I can sit here with all that experience, which is great, but it starts with 1 foot forward. And trust me, you can do it, and you really can. Syndication of apartments is a it's kind of a main thing, mainstream people doing that now, but that's all kind of new too within the last call it 5, 6, 7 years. I've been doing it for a long time.
Yep. And then, Sean says Americans just have to start living below their means, which, if you're trying to accumulate wealth on the back end, you need to.
I'll tell you one thing that I think would be helpful. I think a lot of people focus on expense, and that question. And I don't disagree with that. Trust me, I'm always looking at like I just canceled a country club, and I'm always looking at ways to cut things. I sold a house in Coeur d'Alene, that was costing me 10 grand a month, and I was only using it a couple times a year or a couple months a year. And so, no matter what level you are, you should always be looking at your monthlies and all that kind of stuff. But I actually prefer to take a look at income always. And so I'm always looking at ways to grow my income. And then I don't have to continually focus on the expenses. So I'm not focusing. I'm focusing on the expenses to kind of cut away the stuff that maybe I have not used, or like a gym membership, or something that an app that you're paying for, or whatever. Those kinds of things are things that you should continually do. But I personally think you should focus on side hustle.
Mm-hmm.
And
I did a whole video on that.
I did it, and there's a great video on YouTube on this. I really do. I think that sometimes when you focus on your expenses, it can be a little defeating, because you're getting killed on the income side. But if you focus on the income and the expenses, then I think you might be in a better situation. So how can you make more money? Like right now, I'm launching another company next weekend in Miami with George Gammon and Jason Hartman called The Collective, and we're doing a like a mastermind. And we're gonna, we rented the Versace mansion on Sunday, and we're gonna kick this off for people that want to, listen to us live and all that. That's another company with 2 other people. I'm always, and of course this Ken.com thing
Mm-hmm.
is also, we've got all kinds of verticals there, but I have my books. As you guys know, I've had that going for a while. I've got my properties. I actually own the publishing company. So I've always just focused on income.
Yeah, different streams of
Yeah.
income.
And I didn't know how to publish books. When I took on the publishing company, I didn't all know how to do it. I didn't know how to do the social media stuff. I don't know how to do a mastermind.
Right.
And so I'm learning all these things, and of course I still have my real estate stuff. We have, as you guys know, almost $300 million worth of projects going right now. And we own $1 billion already. And so so we still have all that going, but I'm always, as you know, not all of them work.
Right.
But I think it's better to focus on income. It's more fun, and there's a lot of things that you guys can do from home, a lot of things you can do over the internet. I have friends that are doing very, very, very well on online personal training. They're doing online supplements. They're buying stuff on, from thrift stores and sell them on Amazon. There's
a lot of creative ways.
There's a lot of ways to make money, guys, and just a little bit here and there. And some of that stuff might not do that well in the first year, and some of it really takes off. I mean, even you started off your esthetician business, and now you're doing products, right?
Yeah, doing products.
Okay.
And I have my passive real estate income.
Yeah, so you have your real estate income, you have your esthetician income, which you love. That's a one-on-one. That's time for dollars. But then in addition to that, you have products that you've private labeled, that people buy, that you've decided they like. And so now you have people calling you, and you make profit on that. And so those are buckets of money. Those are silos of money that you're making, and not just relying on one. I actually think if people focused more on income, then they wouldn't have to cut.
Right.
They could go to Starbucks every day.
Right.
They wouldn't have to cut up their credit cards. And, I use my credit cards. I pay them off every month, but I have buckets of money coming in from so many different sources, and some are doing great some months and some aren't.
Right.
And it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. So let's jump over to some questions. Yilu from Premium said, any advice for a young adult in their mid-20s who has enough for a down payment? A lot of you will benefit from this question as well. Should he wait or buy now? He's afraid he's going to get priced out of the market.
Yeah. Well, it's valid. Everybody wants to know what's going to happen with real estate prices. And I think it all boils down. I'm buying right now, as you guys know. Do I think that we're going to have a massive disruption in the next 6 months? I do. I think we've got the eviction moratorium ending, which is somewhere between 10 and 15 million residents. I don't know the exact number because there's different people reporting different numbers. And then we have, millions in forbearance still. So all of that's going to hit. And I think that pricing is going to taper off.
Yeah.
Over the next couple of years. And I know, for multiple reasons. But I also believe it because, here's the biggest reason. People that own a home right now, let's say they've owned it for 3 or 4 or 5 years, it's gone up a lot.
Mm-hmm.
They can't make a lateral trade.
Right.
So there's a trade issue going on right now. So if you own a home that's, let's say you bought it for 300 or 400, it's worth 400. What the 400 home that you get laterally is not what you're in. So so that's I think you're gonna find a lot of people aren't they're gonna either have to really trade up just to get what they're in, and so I think you have that issue. But to your point, we're still buying in markets that make sense financially. So it all boils down to the cash flow issue, which we keep talking about.
Always the cash flow, Elu. Always the cash flow.
Arguably, Phoenix and Scottsdale is, by all measures, one of the hottest real estate markets in the country. Now, up there with Florida and places in, areas in Florida, areas in Texas. But Scottsdale and Phoenix are on fire, just like a lot of the other places. You bought something, 6 months ago?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but it cash flows.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
That's my point.
That's all that matters.
It's
you
still
don't
out
focus
there.
on you're not trying to hit the high of the market or the low of the market. You don't try to sell at the very, very top. You sell when, if you want to sell, you sell when you're happy with the profit. And when you buy at the bottom, you're not going to buy at the very, very, very bottom. There always could be another bottom, or it could go up or whatever, as long as it cash flows. That's all that matters. Yeah,
I think it's a really, really, really good question. A lot of people want to try to figure out to time the market perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that you have to not try that. So one of the reasons that we're buying in Texas is because we can buy an apartment building in Texas for almost 50% less than we can in Phoenix for the exact same property. And the rents aren't that much different.
Right.
That's the difference. Okay. And why would we buy there? Because jobs are going there. So you want to go in the area. You don't want to just do that. You want to make sure that, you can rent it too. And that, that you have, that employment and population growth as well. And so, it's literally just math, as I like to say, price and rent and your expenses. Does it cash flow?
Okay. Yeah. Well, and that's all that comes down to. We got a couple comments on here, that Phoenix is in a bubble or Scottsdale's in a bubble. And really, if you can find a cash flowing property, that's all that matters. It doesn't really, that's
Guys,
it.
I'm telling you right now, you have not seen rent growth like you're going to see in the next 10 years. There's going to be massive rent growth. It's not going to be good for renters, but it's a fact.
Yep.
We have a massive shortage of housing, and we have people falling out of single family, and people falling out of of the rental market. So there's going to be a fairly big push for rental housing, and I think last I looked, we were up to 67, almost 68% home ownership.
Okay.
So we were up to 68, 69% home ownership, I think, in 2008. I might be wrong there, but and then it went all the way down to 62. So that's a really interesting barometer for you guys to watch, because what that basically means is that people are that the rental market is actually getting tighter, and we just went through COVID. I of course went through it as well with our 10,000 units, and it was a rough time as a landlord. But now what's going to happen, mark my words, we're turning back into a renter nation. This is going to go to 68, 67, 66, 65, 64, 63. And all of that, it used to be every 1% was about 1 million people. So think about that. That's a lot of people now pushing down into rental housing. So you're going to have a scarcity issue for rental housing, and you're going to start to see some pretty crazy rent growth, and then you'll start to see all kinds of stuff from the government with trying to help people with that.
And that's the reason too, as we're talking about the middle class, getting an asset, they have to keep in mind that you could get a fixed rate loan versus the increases you're probably going to see on rents.
Right. And the point of that whole rant that I just went on to about, being a renter nation is, if you're buying something now and you're going to have a future demand for it, then that's a good time to buy if it cash flows, because you're going to start to see rents grow over a period of time. Rents are going to get out of control over the next 10 years, I predict.
Yep. And so Drew from Premium wanted to know, he wants to become an accredited investor. Should he syndicate on his own, or should he, invest in a company like MC to get him there quicker?
Sure. Okay, so great question. Okay, so I think it's important to know that the accredited investor is a clearly defined category, and it's only U.S. only, or only U.S. only. So it's U.S. only. Okay, so what that means is the SEC says that this is a net worth guideline. And so what it is your income has to exceed $200,000 a year, or $300,000 if it's joint. And you have to have at least $1 million of net worth minus your primary home. That's what accredited is. Just Google it. Okay, so I don't know Nick's situation, but that's nothing. Oh, Drew, sorry. Apologize. That's nothing. I can't decide that because I don't know, your current situation. I don't know what you invested in. And so it's going to depend, Drew, on what you're investing in and what your net worth is. But those are the categories that you have to follow. Just Google, what is an accredited investor, and you'll see it'll come up. It'll show you very specifically. It's super clear. And then from there, you just have to build your portfolio, whether it's with MC or whether it's anybody else. But for us, we only take accredited investors. So you have to fill out a questionnaire and all that kind of stuff. It's super buttoned up, and it's nothing that is subjective at all.
And CD brought up a good point. Everyone hit the like button, please. It really helps us out. So to move on, Erica wanted to know any market insights into the suburbs of Reno.
I haven't been to Reno in a while, so I'm at a massive disadvantage. I apologize. I don't. I do know that Reno is kind of reemerging on the casino front, and I have a funny story actually. When I lived in Vegas, I got on a plane once and I was flying to Reno, and I was sitting with this guy, and he had all this attention going on, and I was like, who are you? He's like, well, I'm the governor of Nevada. I had no idea, and he was flying there for some conference, and but we have looked at deals around the Sparks area and around some of the areas in Reno, but at the end of the day, Erica, here's the bottom line: whatever market you're looking at, there are a few things that think about it from your standpoint. Why would people want to be in Reno or in the outskirts of Reno? Affordability, jobs, schools, those kinds of things. What I would do is I would go to the economic development partner in Reno itself. You should have one. You do have one. And what their job is to attract business to an area. And that's a really important thing, because you can buy in an area, let's say on the outskirts. The word outskirts tells me, that you've gone out there because it's cheaper, but might not be the case. You want to make sure that you're not, buying in an area that, and just because of it's super affordable and nobody wants to be there. So that's the key. So I don't know if this particular outskirt area is contracting or expanding, or potentially could be expanding later, or is potentially contracting later. That's the big kind of question mark.
Yeah, definitely. And, Sean, this was a question on YouTube a little bit ago, Sean. Sorry it took me a while to get to it. But he said he found a property that does not cash flow for 2 years, but then he says it will. So I don't know if he's anticipating higher rents or if he's planning on refinancing or what he's planning on doing. But, what would your advice be to him? Would you buy a property that's negative cash flow?
So I have.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know the circumstances.
Yeah.
If it's something that's broken, makes complete sense to me. So let me explain. Like I bought properties that are 50% vacant. And the bank, it's owned by the bank or a seller. And so because of that, you're buying properties at a discount. So hopefully you're buying at a discount. Hopefully it's broken. That completely makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
Because then, of course, you need a plan to turn that around. And so, which we did. For us, it was a big project. It took a couple of years, a year and a half, to turn it around. It took a little over a year to even break even, and then it took another year, let's call it, to really make significant profit every month. So, but again, just make sure that if you're just buying it, if you're buying it and hoping that it goes up, I would say that's not much of a strategy. I would say that's basing the future on the past, and I would be careful with that strategy.
Exactly. You have to be really careful if you're buying. You have to really know what you're doing. You can't just assume rents are going to go up or assume you can refinance it, because who knows what interest rates are going to be.
Here's one more really important point that I would suggest, Sean. Make sure that you have 2 years of negative cash flow in the bank before you do it. So, or after you do it. So, let's say it's negative cash flow, $300 a month. You want to make sure that you have $7,200 in the bank to cover that negative cash flow for the 2 years. You're sitting on high ground so that you're not cash calling, and it sounds like it's tight. So just make sure that you have those reserves.
So Ruben from Premium has a great question. How do you approach an owner that has a property not on the market? And I like this question because you can get some really good off-the-market deals.
Yeah. I don't know about you guys, but I get texts and emails and phone calls all the time on my stuff. I get blind letters. It comes all kinds of ways. And so this is a strategy for sure. There's a, it's super competitive right now, but just know that my experience has been that many owners are not, they know what their properties are worth.
Yeah.
So I don't know how much of a great deal you're going to get, but you might. I was just talking to a friend of mine the other day that had a property in Sun City, Arizona. And he had a short-term renter in there, and the HOA kind of came after him, said, we don't want, Airbnbs in our HOA, and which is a whole nother topic, which we're not going to get into today. But he was constantly fighting with the HOA on, and these were good people coming in 2-3 months at a time, and you have to be 55 or older, so it's not like party, central, right? But he got so frustrated with it. Some guy called him, said, I'll offer you X for your property, and he took it.
Yeah.
He's like, you know what? Like, I'm done dealing with this HOA issue and this Airbnb, and it's he's retired, and he's like, he had made a bunch of money on it, so it can happen. And I think a lot of times the point of that story is that you just have to be in the right place at the right time. I'm not selling. People call me all the time. I'll give you a funny story. Some guy called me, and I usually don't pick up phone numbers I don't recognize, but he's like, hey, are you willing to sell, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, okay, and I was just messing around with him. I'm like, so how much is it worth, do you think? He, of course, didn't know. He was just, smile and dial. And, on and on and on and on and on. He's like, well, we can pay all cash. And da-da-da-da. I go, okay, great. Do you know that it's a 264-unit apartment complex? But I waited for about 10 minutes before I mentioned that. And, of course, the things were probably, it's easily over $50 million. So this is, so you got to really know who you're calling. I was just kind of messing around with the kid. I'm like, next time, do your homework. But it is a way to find, and I tell you what, it's not a bad way to find property.
Yeah, you never know. We have a friend in Idaho that he wholesales, which is basically doing that, finding off-market properties and selling them. And he said, you'd be surprised. People have family issues. They don't want to list it. They have all this, stuff going on where they might not want to list the property. So, you can sometimes find somebody.
It happens all the time. There's divorces going on and changes of situations on people that more than you know. And it is a numbers game, though. You can't just
the first 5 people, it's going to be like 500.
You're going to say, you're not going to get lots of phone calls returned, and it is a massive numbers game. So, just be prepared for that.
Yep. So, North Beach on Premium wants to know how you keep your composure and demonstrate reliability to potential investors. So if you're trying to raise money from somebody, how do you, I guess, look confident and get them to invest with you?
Yeah. So I think the best way to do it is to put yourself in their shoes. So what if somebody was coming to you for money, what would the risks be? For me, it would be, does the property really produce what you say it's going to produce? Mm-hmm. Is it, because you can make any deal cash flow, right?
Yeah.
You can make any deal cash flow on paper. So that's number one. And so a seasoned investor is going to pepper you with those kinds of questions. Are your rents market?
Yeah.
And many times they're not. Are they aggressive? Are you showing big rental increases? Are you showing lower expenses? The end of the day, guys, I get packages all the time. I think I told you the story where I was in escrow with a buyer, and then I got their sales package.
Yeah.
On my property.
Right. How
I
bad you
actually owned it. Right. Yeah. So like, hey, this is a property that we can increase the rents a lot, and it has horrible management, and it was me. So I was cracking up because I was taking a look at it, and it's the same pitch every time.
Yeah.
So you better be able to do that. You better be able to back it up because we ended up selling that property, and we checked beforehand, and we at least believed that none of that existed. The other one is if you're trying to do it all yourself and you don't have experience, it's going to be tough for you to be credible.
Yeah.
So you got to have a property manager who knows what they're doing and can sit at the table with you and say, yes, I have XYZ property manager or this person, and she's, done all these comps, and here they are. And, so this is all vetted out, and the expenses are all vetted out, and this market is going this way, and here's all the data. That's what investors invest in is certainty. And so if you have no experience, which you don't need, and you have a lot of experts around there making you look really good, you can totally pull this off. But that's what you need to do is you need to think through all the things instead of just, it's not really a pitch. It's not really a sales job. Because you got to sell yourself. Will it work? And if it won't work, then you shouldn't sit down and try to raise money from an investor.
Yeah, and really, it's not how you demonstrate reliability is your numbers, you have proven numbers, you've done your homework. This is people's hard-earned money. So if you think you're just going to give them a good sales pitch and they're going to invest with you, I mean, sure, that might work for some people, but your knowledgeable investors, they want to see everything. They're going to check everything. And like Ken said, you might not know. I mean, it's hard to know everything, but you need experts around you that do know.
Yeah, and the other thing is you need to treat each deal and everybody's money, with a lot of due diligence, and it turns into another deal and another deal and another deal. Because once you do one deal that works, then you can rely on it and bank on it and say, hey, you have one, of your experience, 2, it's actually worked, 3, you've actually paid your investor back. And now you can have that investor for the next deal call the current investor. And so it's like anything else. It builds upon itself if you've done the right thing.
Exactly. And then Sean from Premium, he wanted to know where you can find a fixed rate loan for single family and also for multifamily.
So what this tells me is that he hasn't done a lot of research. So, apologies, Sean, but you can Google fixed rate loans and there's 50 ads that come up. So, there are a dime a dozen. And I think what you want to do is you want to take a look at, is it direct or is it through a broker? And what are their fees? Because money is money. It doesn't matter who it comes from, and you can from anywhere. And this is a highly, highly competitive market. This is a very saturated market. So, I had a friend who was buying a ranch in Texas, and it's actually a ranch that they're doing some personal development stuff on and that kind of stuff. And they went to one person. They went to a bank. And I'm like, they sent me the thing. I go, I don't think that's a very good rate. I suggest that you go out and get at least 5 more quotes. And in 48 hours, they had 5 more quotes. And they sent them all to me. And there was a massive difference on the terms, on the quotes, on the length, and the rate. I mean, they were all different. They were not the same. And their mind was blown. It was Jeff. Friend of mine, and Seal, and I said, they said, what do you think? And we went through each term sheet from each bank, and one was a broker that brought multiple people, and then they went to 2 local banks, and they're very different. It's like anything, guys. It's like buying a car. People have different views on what their car's worth, or what their house is worth, or what their stuff is worth. It's the same. Money's priced differently by different people, and you really need to look. But, Sean, there's so many options out there. Just, do your homework.
Yep, and make sure it's a fixed rate loan.
Yes.
All right, you guys, that wraps today's episode. Make sure that you sign up for the newsletter if you haven't already. You personally write them every single week. It's kenmcelroy.com/newsletter, and we'll see you guys next week.
Cheers, guys. Thanks again.